finance, a la shmup. What are the Clayton Antitrust Act and the Sherman Antitrust Acts? Well, they're all about controlling monopolies, which a century ago were called trusts. Ironic in that, they essentially stole the trust from the people, the common Joe, Ma and Pa Kettle. Well, in the late 19th century, even more so than today, white men generally ruled the Western world and were, very clubby. Well, Bob here in church pew 7 liked to do business with Mike here in pew 8. Bob ran a tugboat shipping line hauling grain down the Mississippi. Mike here had a bunch of farms and liked to do business with Bob. And, there's Jim here in pew 6 who runs the entire region's worth of banks. And he liked loaning money to farms because, back then, they were always money good to pay their debts. Yeah, there was a time farms were considered, a safe bet. And the three of them formed essentially a vertical monopoly controlling grain distribution in the center of the country, from creation to distribution to sales to, all the financing and banking and stuff underneath it. If they wanted to raise prices on the grain for bread, well, who was to stop them? Yeah, there were no competitors. Why were there no competitors? Well, because the three had teamed up to elbow out anyone else who might come along and, cut them out of the precious resource flows of whatever was needed. And soon the three had enough scale so that if they were buying resources for 1 million acres of farmland, their volume pricing discount were so massive that they could undercut anyone who came along wanting to compete fair and square. Well, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was the first set of anti-monopoly laws to come down the pike. Like it says right there in the name, the act was anti-trusts. It was passed to bust up any unfairly organized legal arrangements or would-be monopolies, which would prevent them from taking advantage of unknowing consumers and provide for a competitive marketplace, because then who wins? Yeah, the consumer. And that's who the government's protecting, right? So what did this mean for poor old Mike, Bob, and Jim? Well, now they couldn't just raise grain prices willy or nilly. Suddenly, there were strictures in place, and our gruesome threesome had to abide by this new rule of law, which meant pricing their product fairly and reasonably, whatever that meant, so that no one was having to sell the family farm to afford to buy a loaf of sourdough, for their kids. And then clever lawyers defending bazillionaires poked so many holes in the Sherman Act, it looked like one of the Real Housewives after her latest Botox treatment. So along came the Clayton Antitrust Act in 1914 to fill in those holes and puff up the cheeks of law, as it were. Well, any little loopholes discovered by the clever lawyers were closed, and more specifics were added to the language. So it was even harder for folks like Mike, Bob, and Jim to pull one over on Ma and Pa Kettle. So, as Billy Joel famously sang, it's just a matter of trust. Yeah, ask your parents. He sang better.